Hey, podcast listeners, Ria Wong with you once again with Nonprofit Lowdown. Today, I am talking with not one, not two, not three, but four guests on one of my favorite topics, which is the topic of women of color fundraisers. I don't think we talk enough about this. And so it is my delight to invite my friend, Christal Cherry, the board pro, founder and board chair of F3, to come with her friends to talk about how to support women of color fundraisers and specifically Black female fundraisers in the space. So I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Christal Crosby, who is the director of events and programs at Case Western University in Cleveland, Ohio. Ninjia Miles, Director of Development, Black Philanthropy, Indiana University Foundation in Indianapolis, Indiana. And Aquanetta Betts, George Mason University Director of Planned Giving in Fairfax, Virginia. Ladies, welcome to the show.
Hey there.
Hey. Look at all this beautifulness. And of course, Christal, always with the glasses. You know, I'm a sucker for good eyewear. So in the funny thing is we have two Crystals. So I'll say Christal, I can't even say Christal C because both of you are Christal C. So Christal Cherry, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about what is F3 and what was the inspiration behind it for you?
Yeah, F3 is Fabulous Female Fundraisers, and it started out just being it just started out with two girlfriends getting together to gripe about, working in the fundraising sector with nonprofits, right? All the frustrations that we go through, Ria. And we got together and just decided we needed to vent and talk and have a space where we felt safe. And that grew into 25 people meeting every month here in Atlanta, Georgia, for about a year before COVID. And then when COVID hit, we went virtual and started meeting virtually and got caught up in all the Zoom rooms. There was a lot of talk about Black women in philanthropy around that time. And I sat in on a panel, I think with Candid. I think AADL, Birgit Burton, did something on Black fundraisers. And so I sat on that panel. And then all of a sudden, we started getting inquiries about how do we join this network of Black women, women of color in Atlanta. And we opened the doors to other folks. And as a result, you see we have people here who are not in Atlanta who have now joined the organization. And now I can say we're 60 strong in 22 states in Canada. So I'm very excited about our growth.
That's incredible. And, coming out of the pandemic, I feel like you are, I hope this doesn't come off as offensive, but basically you are unicorns. Like you're holding the keys to the castle. Like everyone is out here trying to find women of color fundraisers. And I feel like Christal, you found the people. So, Aquanetta, Christal, Ninjia, over to you briefly. Can you just give us a quick sense of your background in nonprofit and why F3 matters to you as fundraisers in the field? Aquanetta, let's start with you.
Yeah, so F3 has been a great space for me. I found F3 probably something on social media or some email somewhere, and I thought, oh, wow, what a great group. Look at all the folks who are in this group, and we run the gamut as far as fundraising goes. We have grant writers, we have VPs of advancement, we have plan giving folks, you name it, they're in F3. And so the knowledge bank is huge. If I have a question about anything regarding nonprofits, fundraising, I go to F3. I put in something in the chat. There are all these great responses that come back. So professionally, as well as personally, F3 has been invaluable in my growth and also having a space where other folks can see the work that I do, and perhaps Plan Giving has been something they thought, I don't see many people of color in that space. And so having F3 as somewhat of a safe space to bounce ideas off of is just a phenomenal asset professionally and personally for me. So kudos to Christal for having the foresight to start the organization.
Excellent. Nigel, actually, I'd love to bounce a question off to you because I know we've had folks on this podcast who've talked about the changing face of philanthropy and in particular communities of color that have more wealth that are able to donate at unprecedented levels. I'm just wondering, to your mind, what is the importance of making sure that we attract and retain fundraisers of color as we think about diversifying our fundraising base?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's really important is to, one, just understand that, one, first and foremost, communities of color have always been philanthropic. This isn't a newer concept. There's a greater light on it now, but this has always happened. And as a Black female fundraiser, I'm aware of that. I participate in philanthropy in the ways that resonate are very common in my community. And just for fundraisers of color, we understand what that looks like. And we're also not coming to them as this is the first time that you're being philanthropic. This is a new concept for you. And so it's really important to have people in organizations from these groups who can, one, educate and advocate, but also just understand maybe the nuance, some of what is important in relationship building, how to approach these donors, what's the best way to go about that, so that they are willing and interested in supporting the organizations.
Excellent. Christal Crosby, over to you. And I'm sure you all probably have had this experience as well of being the only, right? So I often found myself in rooms where predominantly white, I was the only or maybe one of a handful of folks of color. And so I'm just wondering for yourself, like, what has been your experience of fundraising? And eh, are there any instances where you felt like you really would have appreciated having this kind of community before you had this community?
Absolutely. Definitely. My background is working with primarily predominantly white institutions. So I think that I've definitely had those conversations or those experiences where comments and microaggressions have been said. And then to the point, and I'm one of those people, like, I address it or address it to my supervisor, and them not knowing kind of like how to handle that or what to do with that information. Or even kind of almost disregarding it in a way. I remember one instance in particular where I was out to dinner with a donor, and he made some comments about me and where I went to undergrad. And I remember going back to my supervisor saying, like, hey, I had this conversation, I had this situation, and then nothing ever coming of it. Kind of being, not to say dismissed, but kind of like, well, I mean, maybe that's just the way he is, or that's just the way that they talk, especially when you're dealing with kind of male, older, kind of that over 60 white male engineering crowd. So I think that the importance of having these sorts of networks is that, in those moments, being able to be heard, or knowing that, like, because sometimes I know we've all been in a situation where you just kind of like, well, am I crazy? Or maybe they did, is it me? But having that network and having that support system that kind of validates how you're feeling, and knowing that you're not alone and that you're not insane, or yes, I did hear right, or yes, I did understand that, and I am reading the situation accurately. And then giving you those tools and that advice to kind of help you navigate those difficult conversations that you often have to have with, supervisors and employers that don't look like you. You know what I mean? And I think that F3 and being a part of this group has been instrumental for me in kind of helping me kind of advocate for myself and providing with those tools and kind of giving me advice. And then just, again, I think like Christal said, just sometimes you just need to vent, and just say, like, this man is crazy, so I
Yep.
think that's the benefit of like these sorts of communities, is that, again, giving you those tools from someone that's kind of been there and can kind of help you navigate those difficult conversations.
Yeah. Thank you, Christal. So this question is for any one of you. I know that there are folks in the nonprofit sector that listen to this podcast, and we know that it's not just enough to hire a fundraiser of color. We also need to think about how are we setting them up for success as leaders, as and supporting them, right? Because Christal, to your point, I think when you feel unsupported or you feel like you're being gaslighted by your executives, you're like, am I crazy? And it leads to burnout. So just curious, as folks are listening to this, what are the things that leaders and boards should be thinking about when bringing on a fundraiser of color and setting them up for success?
Well, I will say this. I remember in an interview once I asked whether or not their donors and their board members were ready to have not only a woman of color but a bold woman of color from New York City, because I live in the South, right? And so were they ready to have someone like me on their team? And I think that's a legitimate question when you're coming into a culture where you're playing a huge role. You're all in the nooks and crannies of the organization. You're interfacing with the staff, with the program people, with the finance office, with donors, with volunteers, with stakeholders. And if this is not a culture that's going to be welcoming of someone from a different background, who may speak differently, who may see things differently, then you're setting that person up for failure. And so I think in that interview, they were shocked that I asked that question, but I've learned from being in places where I didn't feel welcome to now ask that question before I insert myself in a culture. And so I say to those who are hiring, what is your culture of your organization? How are you preparing to bring in people who may not have the same opinions and voices and lifestyles as everyone else? And so how you bring me in, how you introduce me to staff, whether or not my picture is on the website, whether or not you welcome me in the newsletter, whether or not you let the board know I'm coming and then invite me to come and introduce myself, how you present me to the community is going to send a strong message to them. This person is important in this community, and we're putting her front and center because we want you to know who she is. Now, if I'm not announced, if I'm sitting in the back of the room or I'm sitting on the periphery of the wall in the board meeting, then what's the message, right? And so I think that's the message for us, is that you're really going to have to present us in a way to let the community know that we're important and a part of the community.
Yeah, that's so critical. Christal, I want to go back to something you said, because I think a lot of us have experienced microaggressions in the course of doing business, right? So, and I would argue that probably women in particular have experienced their fair share of, sticky situations or icky situations. So I guess I'm wondering, how have you navigated this, and how, I mean, are microaggressions, I hate to say it's like a part of doing business, which is a terrible thing to say, but I also, having, experienced this myself, I'm sure y'all have experienced this as well. Like, what do we do about this when we also know that, like, sometimes money hangs in the balance?
Wow, that's a great question. I think that, like, for me, when encounter with those types of experiences, is just to a um and in that moment, just to kind of deflect and get the attention off yourself, and to and not, and as much as you want to kind of go sister girl, but let me tell you and let me educate you, that's not even appropriate or something that you would ever do with, like, especially with a donor of the institution. But I think it's just going back to my employer, to my division, and saying, hey, this is what happened. Have we even considered having an opportunity or a training for, us as professionals? How do we deal with those types of things? Because I don't know what's the right answer or the wrong, I guess, what the exact wrong answer is, but how do we deal with that? And then how are we making sure that we're showing up in spaces, or that as an institution, we're saying that, like, diversity and people of color, and those are things that we value as a business, as an institution. Then how do we make sure that our donors and our alumni also understand that those are key values for us as an institution? So making sure that we're kind of reinforcing that message. So as much as you kind of want to go, let me tell you, and read somebody. But I think for me, it's just going back to our division to, again, raise those questions and to bring those points up across, and to say that, like, this isn't, like, we don't exist in a vacuum. So how are we appearing and showing up to our donors and our alumni and people that we're engaging with as an institution?
Yeah, really excellent point. I'm curious, Nija and Aquanetta, if you have any additional points about, like, what does support look like? Because I think I'm just putting on my own hat as a former executive director. Like, I don't know necessarily what support could look like, and I do think that, especially post George Floyd, there are uh, changing conversations that are absolutely necessary and need to happen. And so, from your perspective, like, what advice would you give to the leader who is wanting to be supportive, wanting to move the needle forward, but not necessarily knowing what the right thing to do is?
Yeah, sure. I'll chime in here really quickly. The one thing I do want to piggyback on, Christal Crosby said, you know, when you go to leadership, whether it's your manager, supervisor, whomever the leader is, having the leader to take a step back and understand that the fundraiser is expressing their feelings, and their feelings are real and legitimate. And so none of the, oh, grow tough skin or get over it, that's the wrong way to be supportive. So I think from a leadership standpoint, just recognizing that that fundraiser is coming to you, sharing how they feel, and we can't dismiss a person's feelings. So that is like the basis, I think, for support. Training for leaders on how to address these conversations, because they certainly do happen to fundraisers of color in particular. I know there are some donor bill of rights, or there are some ways that a donor should behave or act, and there's some things out there different organizations have put out there. So just knowing that donors oftentimes may say things that are inappropriate or insensitive, I think leadership should find a way to support their fundraisers of color around those ideas, because they certainly do happen. And they happen a lot more, I think, than leadership realizes. So being supportive in that way and not dismissing a fundraiser's feelings or the way they have taken in a comment from a donor.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is, in addition to, you know, creating that space where a fundraiser can share what, you know, their experiences and how that's making them feel, making sure that as a supervisor, a leader, that you're helping cultivate a safe space for them to go and do the work and make the impact that they're trying to make. And so that may mean having an uncomfortable conversation with a donor. You know, a lot of times we put a heavy emphasis on a donor and how much they've given to an organization, and kind of let that kind of rule how they move in the space. And it may be at the expense of fundraisers for their own personal psychological safety. And so there may be a space where you may have to have a conversation with a donor and just, you know, let them know and be okay with that. And so there's, I know we kind of tend to give all the power to the donor, but also as we try to show up in the space and be ourselves and authentic and represent the organization, we should also feel safe.
Thanks, Nija. Actually, Aquanetta, I have a question for you, because you are in planned giving, which is not necessarily an area that a lot of people think about in terms of fundraising. And certainly, I personally have not seen a lot of folks of color in planned giving. So I'm just curious, like, how did you end up in planned giving, and what has your experience been like talking to people about their wills and bequests?
Yeah, well, I absolutely love plan giving. I have a background as an estates and trust attorney. So it's like the perfect marriage of working with folks who were leaving gifts to charities through their estate plans. And what really sparked my interest is that over the years as an estate planning attorney, clients would come into the office before we even talked about charitable giving. And as we've heard, being charitable is nothing new to communities of color. It's just the way or the method that we've gone about it. And the folks will come in, they pull out lists of charities, shirt pocket or purse, they grab this handwritten note, and I was just blown away time and time again with the generosity. And so that sparked my interest into planned giving. I realized there are nonprofits who are not really stewarding these folks. They're not on the radars. They may not be huge givers during their lifetime, but upon their passing, they're leaving significant gifts. And so there's a gap there. I saw that gap and I thought, there's a lot more that nonprofits can do. So that's my segue into planned giving. Absolutely love it. When it comes to donors of color, there's a lack of documentation. So the charitable giving is there. The heart for giving, not a question at all. What is lacking is that we don't have the follow through. Oftentimes, there's no estate plan in place. When it comes to wills, estate plans, people of color are even lower on that list as far as having a will in place. Most Americans do not have an estate plan. And so when you get to people of color, there are fewer of us with estate plans. So there's an educational opportunity there for organizations. We as organizations need to do a better job of informing. We have a role to play in this. So there are a couple of events coming up, national Estate Planning Awareness Week is a really big opportunity for nonprofits to do something. It's the third week in October. It's a week set aside by Congress since 2008 for educational and informational purposes around financial wellness. And so organizations, this is a call, do something, community outreach of some sort. So I know you asked me a couple questions, Rhea. I hope I answered them, but I'm very passionate about estate planning. It literally ties right into plan giving. So
Yes,
for
yes,
people of
yes.
color, yeah, we need to really jump on this. And organizations, I put a charge out there for you to take that week in particular, not just that week, but there are many more opportunities to grab a hold and put some educational information out there to inform your supporters. And you'll probably see a huge benefit from doing so.
Oh, wait. Aquanetta, we're going to have you come back at some later point and talk about plan giving. I am in the middle of estate planning with my parents and my mother-in-law right now, so I know what you say is true, which is people don't think about estate planning. They like kick the can down the road and they're like, okay, but we need to talk about this. All right, y'all, on this call, I don't know about you, but I wasn't a little girl thinking, you know what I want to grow up to be when I grow up? I want to be in development. So I'm curious, both like how did you find your path to development? And then B, what would be your advice to folks listening to the call who themselves are folks of color or women of color thinking about what does my career path look like? So let's start with the origin story and then advice for the young people out there. So Christal, I see you unmuted. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I fell into development. I was working at American University in Washington, D.C. In the academics office and befriended a woman in the development team office. And she and I started talking and she asked me if that was something I'd be interested in. I didn't even know what it was. I was like, what is development? I have no idea what that is. And she told me it's fundraising. I said, oh no, that's not something that I'm interested in. I'm here to educate minds. I want to be a college president. Right? And so I thought that was my trajectory. And she continued to talk to me. She was in my ear. And my actual interview for fundraising was on September 11th. That should have been a sign, right? My interview into the entree of fundraising was on September 11th. So needless to say, we had to reschedule that interview. But I fell up into it because she invited me to interview for the job. She kept telling me, you're outgoing. You know, you can still work with students. You can still work with alumni. This is a wonderful way to make sure that their education is, you know, is there for them. And so she talked me into it. So I tried it and I never looked back. And for those who are looking to get into it, I say, do your research, talk to folks like us who have been doing it for a long time to really find out if it's something for you, because it's not for everyone. It's not for the lighthearted. There are going to be some difficult days ahead in fundraising, and you got to be able to withstand it. So not to discourage anyone, but to know that, you know, dealing with donors, dealing with bosses who often don't get it, dealing with board members, it's tough.
Yeah, and I find too that in the, you know, I do trainings for folks, and I often find, particularly with folks of color, when talking about fundraising, there's a real reluctance to talk about money or like the relationship to wealth because, you know, historically, let's talk about, you know, policies like redlining and predatory lending practices and the evils of capitalism. Like there are reasons and traumas that have occurred as a result of capitalism and wealth in America. And basically the job is you need to talk about money. So I'm curious, like Ninjia, Christal, Aquanetta, how have you been able to, I mean, assuming, let me not assume that you had stuff to work through, but you know, have you seen this as something that fundraisers in general have to work through and or fundraisers of color in particular have to work through?
Yeah, I would say from my own personal experience, it was something that I had to work through. I was one of the people who discovered very early on that I wanted to be in fundraising. So I knew by the time I graduated undergrad that this is what I was going to do, and kind of was on a trajectory of like, how do I get to that point? But I know that there was a you know, certain point where it was very uncomfortable to talk about asking for a gift at a, you know, a certain amount. And it was like, oh, that's weird. Like, why would I ask them for that? What if they're uncomfortable with that? And I think it was through some sort of like training that I experienced that, you know, they brought that up, that it's like, you know, you may be kind of projecting your own feelings about money, and maybe it would be something that would be uncomfortable for you. But a donor, when you're getting to that point, you know, they are very much aware of the you know, they've been active in the conversation. And hopefully by that point, when you're making the ask, it is a, was I supposed to keep going? Sorry.
No, no, I'm so sorry. Hold on one second.
Okay. Yeah.
I am so sorry. I the guy cleaning the vents needed something. So I'm sorry. So projecting your baggage
Yeah.
onto other people.
Yes. And so they had shared that usually by, you know, in a conversation with a donor, by the time that you are going to make the ask, they have been very active in the conversation and they're expecting it. And then you've done your research and you've had the strategic conversation to understand how much it is, you know, that you're asking. So it's not that big of a surprise. And so taking myself out of that, and really just, you know, focusing on the donor and understanding that it shouldn't be uncomfortable if I've done what I need to do on my end, made me a lot more comfortable with it. So that's kind of how I've gotten past it. And then it's also made me rethink what, you know, things about money as well. And so in addition to just preparation, just also my own like learning and understanding and undoing some of the thoughts that I had grown up, you know, experiencing.
For sure. For like, I talk about money mindset all the time, and you know, my background coming from an Asian American community, it's very taboo to talk about money, right? So I had to get over that to be like, if I want to be good at this job, I have to really unpack my own stuff and my own cultural stuff about money, and really the cultural stuff about philanthropy, because in the Asian community we don't talk about philanthropy. Like think about philanthropy, capital P, like some white guy behind a desk, right? But not just your point, like we practice philanthropy all the time. We just don't call it philanthropy. We call it helping out our family. We call it sending money back home. We call it, you know, giving my cousin a loan. So thank you for that. And Christal, let's round it out with you. I'd love to know, what was your journey to philanthropy, and any advice that you'd give to young people who are curious, philanthropy curious, developing
Sure.
curious.
Sure. So my background, believe it or not, is in sports and athletics. So I graduated from undergrad and college and started working for the professional baseball team here in Cleveland. And, you know, I was going kind of on like that career trajectory. So kind of bounced around to several like D1 collegiate programs. And then I was at one and got that I want to go work for a real nonprofit, and did that for some time. And then wanted to get back into higher education, but not necessarily athletics. And I think the great thing for me and my story is that like just knowing those transferable skills, like I know that I'm really great at building relationships with people. I can the event planning background and all that good stuff. So I started actually got back into collegiate athletics, into higher education, working in alumni affairs. So working with like the affinity programming. So and that's kind of how like I kind of got into development and loving it. And now I'm in donor relations and events. And so I think that people have to really just stop looking at like what the job actually is and look at what skill set that you have that can enable you to be successful in a position. So I've done like some fundraising and development work with previous nonprofit organizations. But like I said, I was really good at talking to people. I'm highly organized and I'm really good at very goal oriented. So these are some skills that I was able to kind of transfer those things, and I can event plan. So that's kind of how I kind of got into this work and into this field, because I just wanted to be someplace where I just love being on a college campus. So for me, that's something that I was kind of looking to do, but not necessarily the long hours of athletics.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Well, ladies, thank you so much for being on the show. So, Christal Cherry, if folks are listening and they want to find out more about F3, like what is F3? How can they get involved? What kind of support could they look to if they join F3?
Yeah, no, well, I would first send them to our website, which is fabfemalefundraisers.org. And that pretty much outlines who we are. But yeah, we're so much more than a professional network. I mean, a lot of us have become friends. We have a mentoring program where we've matched some of our seasoned professional fundraisers with our younger ones. We become a giving circle in May, and we all nominate nonprofits, and then we choose one, and then we all pool our funds together and give back to that nonprofit. It's usually a nonprofit led by a woman of color. And then in the fall, we retreat and get together. In November, first weekend in November, we usually go somewhere in the mountains of Georgia or Tennessee. And this year we're going to Rhode Island, and we get to take off our shoes and socks and just relax and sit by the fire and go hiking and all kinds of stuff. It's just been amazing. And then in December, we have an award ceremony where we honor 3 women who are doing amazing work in the nonprofit sector. So it's not just about us, and we, of course, we want to make sure that as fundraisers we have the resources that we need for us to be successful, but we're also about giving back to the community for all the blessings that we've had, the blessing that we have as a village, and we can pool our resources and make a difference for other women, and that's what we do. So fabfemalefundraisers.org is our website. We are accepting new members. We do cap at 75. We want to keep it fairly small because I want to remember everyone's birthdays, and I can if it's 5,000 people. So, yeah, everyone gets birthday greetings from us, and we have an active group me chat. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, and we post resources, we post articles, we congratulate each other when we win something big or get a new job. It's just a wonderful network of support for women of color in the sector. So, if you're interested, please visit our website.
Fantastic. Well, we will make sure to put all the information in the show notes. But in the meantime, ladies, thank you so much for your time and for all you do and for supporting each other, because the work is not easy. I know we are out here trying to make it happen. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Rhea. This has been great.
Yes,
Thank you.